How'd you like to listen to .NET Rocks with no ads? Easy. Become a patron. For just $5 a month, you get access to a private RSS feed where all the shows have no ads. $20 a month will get you that and a special .NET Rocks patron mug. Sign up now at patreon.netrocks.com.
Hey, Carl and Richard here. As you may have heard, NDC is back, offering their incredible in-person conferences around the world. And we'd like to tell you about them. NDC Copenhagen is happening August 27th through the 31st. Go to ndccopenhagen.com for more information.
NDC Porto is happening October 16th through the 20th. Go to ndcporto.com to register.
And check out the full lineup of conferences at ndcconferences.com.
Hey there. This is Jeff Fritz, the purple blazer guy from Microsoft, letting you in on a little secret about my friend Carl Franklin. You know, the guy who started .NET Rocks, the first podcast about .NET. In 2002, the guy who's been teaching Blazor on YouTube since 2020. Yeah, that Carl Franklin. Well, Carl's joined up with the folks from Code in a Castle to teach a week-long hands-on Blazor class at, are you ready? Get this, at a castle/villa in Tuscany. It's sort of a luxury vacation with Blazor learning built in. Carl's calling it the Blazor Master Class. You'll learn Blazor from the ground up, finishing the week with the ability to build and deploy Blazor applications. Since the training happens for only 4 hours in the morning over 6 days, you can bring your significant other, your partner with you, and you should, right? This part of Italy is absolutely beautiful. There's so much to see and do, and Larry and Marco from Code in a Castle are organizing daily activities both at the castle and in the area. The castle is in the Maremma, a less touristed region of Tuscany, offering both classic Tuscan hill country as well as easy access to the Etruscan Riviera with sublime local food, wine, and olive oil around every corner. Breakfast is included every day. There will be 2 communal dinners at the castle bookending the experience, and most other meals and all activities are included. And did I mention you'll learn Blazor in person from Carl Franklin? Listen, space is limited and for very good reason. This is quality training in a beautiful setting. Go to codeinacastle.com/Blazor2023. That's BLAZOR 2023 to take advantage of this amazing opportunity to join Carl in Tuscany for an unforgettable week of La Dolce Vita while advancing your programming skills in this important new technology.
Hey, guess what? It's .NET Rocks. I'm Carl Franklin.
And I'm Richard Campbell.
And we're back.
Yeah, we're doing the thing.
Doing the thing.
The art's off the walls.
Oh, I was going to ask.
You know, in the long running, slowly packing up the house.
Right.
All the art's off the walls except the 2 really big pieces. I don't know if you remember the totem.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Photograph, the Rodney Lowe.
Yeah.
8 foot by 4.5 feet. Ask me how I know.
Did you build a frame for it or something?
Well, and who's got a wall big enough for it, right? So we're really concerned. I don't want to put it in storage, but our friend Kent Alstad has a place that has some big high walls. So I said, would you take care of this for me? And he's like, yeah. Now I have to pay a team to build a scaffold to take it down and then take it up there, build another scaffold and put it back up. But, at least it's going to a good place. Yeah. I mean, maybe someday we'll build another house that has a wall big enough for this thing. We do love the piece. Yeah. But it's enormous.
You don't want it in storage though, right?
I don't want to put it in storage. And there's enough. I mean, just cleaning up all the art on the rest of the walls is like a lot of this is going to get stored away, but it's stored away under the, stairs kind of thing, not something so gigantic that it's going to crush under its own weight.
Right. Well, that's great news. I have some news for Better Know Frameworks. So roll the crazy music.
Hey. All right, dude. What do do you got?
Well, last night. Okay, so this is the 28th, right?
Mm-hmm.
So last night, this is the 28th. So last night I was in New Hampshire with our friends Patrick Hines and Dwayne LaFlotte.
Oh, I know those guys.
Yeah. So we do this little show called Security This Week.
Nice.
And it is our 100th show.
Woohoo. Congratulations.
Yeah, I know. I've done this 100 thing a couple of times.
Once or twice.
Yeah.
It's a great milestone, right? I mean, there's not that many podcasts that get to 100 episodes.
Yeah. So the thing I want to tell everybody, if you haven't heard Security This Week, is be prepared to laugh. We make tragedy fun. We talk about all the hacks and, ransomware and all the attacks that have happened over the week. And often there is a chance to laugh at something. So, and it's necessary for that kind of content, right?
Oh, for sure.
Because it's so dry.
It can be, without a doubt.
Yeah.
And certainly when I do security related shows on Run As, I think one of my top 10 shows of all time is a show with Dana Epp walking through what it took to recover from a ransomware attack with a company.
Yeah.
Like it is like 6 months. Like that's reality.
Yeah. One of the stories that we talked about this week is Microsoft putting anti-ransomware stuff in Windows 11.
Yeah, yeah.
They're trying to stem that tide.
Just make it that much harder. Well, in the end, it's always privilege escalation, right?
Yeah.
So another, not to plug Run As left, right, and center, but I just did a show with Sammy Leho where we talked about the fact that multi-factor authentications work so well that the number one exploit for ransomware is no longer phishing. It's unpatched servers.
Yeah.
And so now we're having this conversation about you can't afford the time to test the patches before you deploy them. The risk is higher. So it's better to just deploy the patch and deal with the occasional failure from that than it is to be exposed to ransomware because you haven't patched immediately.
Oh my God. I gotta mention this one. And, we'll get to Thomas in a minute. I know he's chomping at the bit. But, one of the things that came out this week was an absolutely undetectable vulnerability in AMD, Ryzen, whatever their Z
Ryzen,
thing.
yes.
Ryzen. AMD Ryzen chips, CPUs, where you can take over without any privilege escalation. You can take over every application or access every application that is running, even in a cloud scenario, which is scary.
Yeah, I think you're talking about Zenbleed.
Zenbleed.
Yeah, and Zenbleed is basically the same exploit as Meltdown and Spectre on the Intel side. I mean, they're not in the wild. It's a theoretical exploit.
Yeah.
It's, based on CPU caching. So it's kind of random,
but there is a firmware update. So
they got to fix it. And the trade, of course, is cost and performance. They're going to slow down.
That's right.
They're going to, because they're managing security cap. And this is the same problem that we had with, Spectre and Meltdown. And I'm reminded that AMD made fun of Intel at the time.
Oh, yeah.
And said, this would never happen to our CPUs.
Just like Apple made fun of Windows in the day, we never get hacked.
That would never happen.
That would never happen.
Do not throw rocks. It is all glass houses.
The gods of vengeance and irony are hitting you with some smackdown.
Yeah, they will. They are upon you. Anyway, I wish them well. Get your microcode patched up. You'll be okay.
And listen to Security This Week. And it's episode 100 this week, securitysthisweek.com.
And congrats to you guys. That's awesome.
Yeah. So who's talking to us today, Richard Campbell?
Grabbed a comment off of show 1846. Boy, that's a big number. This is the show we did with Michael Perry when we were talking about immutable architecture.
Great show.
And I know we're going to be upping our architecture game today. So I figured I would refer to a previous architecture show because Michael Smale, this is only a couple of months ago, wrote this comment. He said, "Hey, great show, guys. Especially loved the bit about the partial refunds, which caused all sorts of fun in my workplace." This idea, transactions are immutable kind of thing. And it's like, okay, but see this invoice, we're going to give back some of the money for that. Like you've got to plan that in, just like back orders, all of that stuff. These are business cases that have to show up in your architecture.
Right.
Fantastic, too, to hear about operational transformation, which has eluded my memory since I first heard about it in a mobile developer conference in New Zealand. I will be listening to this one over again. Nice. And that I find really interesting, right? Like there's, and certainly Michael Perry, that was some dense material we got from him. Probably takes a few listens to really pick up all the detail. Yeah. Everything that Michael said.
You can listen to that while you're driving your X-Wing fighter around the Death Star.
There you go.
Yeah. Because I know he does.
Michael, thank you so much for your comment, and a copy of Music to Go By is on its way to you. And if you'd like a copy of Music to Go By, write a comment on the website at .netrocks.com or on the Facebooks. So we publish every show there. And if you comment there and we read it on the show, we'll send you a copy of Music to Go By.
And it occurs to me that I can't say you can follow us on Twitter anymore because it's not called Twitter.
Yeah, the social media service formerly known as Twitter.
It's at twitter.com. So go to twitter.com so you can follow us on X. All right. I just have 3 words for you. WTF.
Yeah, no.
Has this guy completely lost his mind?
I think I've said this before. It's like, I miss the Elon that sent his sports car into space. Like, that was a pretty fun Elon. Yeah. This Elon is nutty.
He's just nuts.
But every time we can be reminded that just because you've made a lot of money doesn't mean you're necessarily smart is not a bad thing either.
That's true. It's a cautionary tale.
That's it.
All right. Well, you can follow us on X, I suppose, but the fun is happening over on Mastodon. So join us there. I'm Carl Franklin at techhub.social.
And I'm Rich Campbell at mastodon.social.
And, go on there and send us a toot and let us know you're listening.
Yeah. And I'm also hanging out on the Blue Skies and the Threads,
I haven't gotten to Blue Sky yet. And Threads, we talked about that a little bit. I don't really have a big Instagram presence, but I guess I'm going to build it up.
Yeah, if you put a little time into Instagram and then activated Threads, maybe you'd get some useful results. But it is interesting to see the market fragmenting. We've had a few folks bugging us about doing more stuff on LinkedIn, too, because that seems to be kind of a sensible place.
Okay.
All right.
Let's bring on Thomas. Thomas Betts is the lead editor for architecture and design at InfoQ, a co-host of the InfoQ podcast, and a laureate software architect at Blackbaud. That's BLACKBAUD. That is not an accent. Blackbaud.
It sounds a little Boston.
That's like Patrick Hines saying Blackbird. Blackbaud. For over 2 decades, his focus has always been on providing software solutions that delight his customers. He's worked in a variety of industries, including social good, retail, finance, healthcare, defense, and travel. Thomas lives in Denver with his wife and son, and they love exploring beautiful Colorado. His collection of .NET Rocks coffee mugs
he has a collection.
Allows him to use a different one each day of the work week. Welcome back, Thomas.
Thank you. Yes, and I do actually change them out every day. So
that's so cool.
Just for sustainability, right? So they wear evenly.
I think you are our number one commenter.
At one point, yeah.
I'm pretty
probably
pretty confident in saying that.
Yeah. You're one of the reasons that on Run As I made different colored mugs.
I know I don't have a Run As mug. It's the one thing I don't have.
What?
Well, there's a simple solution to this, Thomas. Like, it's not that complicated, really.
Well, then I have to get all the colors of Run As mugs,
and there are 11 of them. And if you can get them all, I'll make you a gold one. So there's 12. You have an even dozen.
And don't ever stop drinking coffee. Otherwise, we're screwed. So what are you thinking about these days, Thomas?
Thinking more about architecture. So like in my bio mentioned, I work at Blackbaud, which is the software provider for social good. And in my spare time, I work for InfoQ, do some writing and editing, which was interesting because we're talking about me commenting on the show. I actually looked it up last night. My first comment, back from when it was an email us a comment, not write a comment on the website,
right?
Was on episode 227, or I think it was right on 227. And it actually ties into the theme of InfoQ and QCon, which is information Robin Hoods. We want to take information and spread it out there. So for people that don't know, InfoQ is a website and a platform for news and articles and podcasts for mostly on software early adopters and innovator trends, but really it covers the whole gamut. So I cover architecture and design over there and a little bit of everything else because architecture and design is a big umbrella for what is in software.
Did you listen to that show with Michael Perry by any chance?
I listened to all the shows.
Of course.
The immutable architecture one.
Yeah.
There's some good tips. A lot of things. If you don't have to change stuff, it makes life easier, but everything in architecture is trade-offs, right? So you have to think about what are your business consequences. You can't just go and implement something in the architecture thinking it's going to make better performance. Well, what does that mean on the other side?
Yeah. Yeah. It was a really impressive talk, I thought.
Absolutely.
I was impressed with the guy, with Michael. I mean, I had, met him in social situations and stuff.
Yeah, we've known him a long time. He's been a speaker for forever.
Yeah. But that one really was like, whew. So in terms of shoring up your architecture, are we going to start with the over architecture problem? Or do you want to start with the under architecture problem?
Well, I think I want to start with what is architecture, because
that's good too.
People don't know. Imagine walking down the street. I live in Denver. There's a lot of high rises. Ask anyone on the street, give me an example of architecture. They point to the buildings.
Right.
And then you ask them for an example of software architecture, and they probably run away, honestly.
Yeah.
But in the community, you ask someone, and the best they can do is maybe point to a diagram. And it's like, here are the blueprints.
It's a UML drawing, isn't it?
It's the UML drawings. It's what the boxes and arrows. But
that's
not
old
the
people,
same.
By the way, nobody knows what that is anymore.
SysML, is that the new one? But we don't have the physical thing to look at. Like software is just, it's electrons, not molecules. You can't go up and touch the software. You can touch the hardware. But people don't know what software architecture is. And I think the same problem is also about, if you ask someone, what is a software architect? Like, imagine introducing yourself at a party and you say, I'm an architect. They're like, oh, you design buildings. That's really cool. Mm-hmm. You ever introduced yourself as a software architect? You get the bobblehead effect. If someone looks at you like, that sounds impressive. They have no idea what that means.
No.
But that's true within the community. Like, even within software development, we have all these definitions of what is architecture, what is the role of a software architect.
Yeah. I tend to call myself a software developer, and then they ask me to fix their printer, and then I get angry and leave.
Right.
That's why my mom still says that he does something with computers. And I'm like, that's valid.
Yeah.
It's not inaccurate.
It's not inaccurate.
But you say you're a software architect. Once in a while, you're going to get someone that says, so what does that mean?
Yeah. Well, I think if you look at what I think of architects need to do, there's like some common responsibilities that every architect has to have, whether you're an enterprise architect or a solution architect or a software architect, like just generic terms. And this goes back to the comment a little bit. You need to understand both the technical and the business requirements. Mm-hmm. You can't just do one or the other. Mm-hmm. And then the architecture part of it is you have to make those architecture decisions. You have to design systems. And then once you've made those design decisions, you have to explain them to stakeholders.
Right.
Now, the thing about all of those, like, do this and do that, understanding the technical and business responsibilities, like, none of that says you have to have a title that says architect. Mm-hmm. Like, I was doing architecture long before someone said, okay, you're now an architect.
Yeah.
Right. And so, I mean, you make the point that software architecture is more about an activity than a title.
Right. Right.
And any developer that doesn't use an architect is the architect.
Right. Yeah. The accidental architect.
Yeah.
And that goes to, if anyone has to be an architect, especially if you're the only person on the team, anyone can practice architecture. So if we don't really know what the term means, and we're not sure what we're trying to do, I'm saying, well, we can level up and get better at it. Well, how do we get better at it? And I think if you don't focus so much on what you're trying to deliver, don't focus on the UML diagrams or whatever you're producing, go to the core skills, the underlying behaviors you have to be an architect. And the four that I came up with, and it's kind of like a pyramid, they build upon each other. Mm-hmm. First one at the baseline is good communication.
Yeah.
And then second to that is decision making. Now, when I tell people that, they're like, but the architect is responsible for the decisions. Why isn't that the first primary responsibility? And I'll get back to that. But just to finish out the list, above that is adaptability, being able to respond to change, and then leadership. Like I said, all of those are important. And any given day, what you have to do and what you have to focus on might change based on your day-to-day tasks. But as I've been observing this for years, this is kind of the base rank of how they fall into play. And I think I need to say, going back to what I talked about with InfoQ, most of what I'm talking about today is not just my own observations. One of the nice things I get to do with InfoQ is I work with experts. They're a lot smarter than me, solving much harder challenges. And I tend to reference, this person taught me this thing and make sure I give credit where credit is due. If you go back, I listened to it last night. That first comment that I gave to .NET Rocks, I actually said, I stopped listening to the show and sent a link to my coworkers because I thought it was my responsibility to share information with others.
Yeah.
So this kind of goes to that whole theory of why I like working with InfoQ, is because we are trying to, share the knowledge with everyone.
Yeah. Going back to the whole, people don't understand what a software architect is. I find that using the analogy of building a house or building a building is great because people can say, oh, well, you don't just start slapping down bricks. No, you don't just start, hammering, nailing boards together. No. You have to have a plan. And how do you have a plan? You make a blueprint. Well, who designs that? And it's the architect, right? And the architect has to know the laws of physics, and they have to know the art of the tools that they're using to make blueprints or whatever. And then they also, like you said, the stakeholders, they have to satisfy the homeowner who is hiring them to design the house. And, they say, oh, we want the patio here, and we want the garden here, and we want a sunken living room. And how does that work? And so the architect figures out how to make that work within the laws of physics. And he may come back and say, you're going to need a great big beam across this open ceiling because it's not going to support blah, blah, blah. And then, okay, the stakeholder says, yeah, all right, we can live with that, but we have to paint it green.
I think that's a good analogy. I love having analogies and metaphors because it helps explain things in different terms than, again, that software that you can't see. And the house is a great one because, yes, you're clearly working with different stakeholders. They say, I want my bedroom this big and I want the bathroom to have this kind of stuff. And then the architect has to know things like, and the plumbing has to do these things so we don't fill the house up with sewer gas.
Right.
And make sure the electrical system doesn't short circuit.
Right.
And the homeowner assumes those things.
I would point out, as someone who has built a couple of houses, there are actually specialists in each of those skills that the architect wrangles.
Right.
He goes to a structural engineer and says, what do you think? And takes that pushback and goes to the plumber that's going to lay the stuff out. And he's going to say, oh, I need a stack here and a stack there. And so, some walls are going to have to be a bit bigger because we've got to fit a 3-inch pipe through it. It is all dialogue.
Yes.
It's a group of experts collaborating.
Sort of like the general contractor, but before anything gets built.
Mm-hmm.
They're the general contractor of all the other architects or designers of different systems.
Yeah, but I would argue the GC's another role because they're the implementer. They're the folks that are supervising the implementation.
Yes, but that doesn't start happening until after the architecture.
Yeah, certainly in house building, the architect and the engineer are working to get to they won't get permits until they submit a plan that's going to work.
That's true. Yeah.
We don't have that formality in software. A lot of people just go off and start writing code.
Yep. And I think that's where the software architect tends to wear all those different hats. You have to be able to communicate with all those people in those different roles and then sometimes step in and do the work. The general contractor can pick up a hammer and do some of the work. They can do the plumbing. They might not be a plumber, but they know some of the skills. That's why I think that architects should still write code. Some people think architects are just doing the design, coming up with pictures. I think you have that responsibility to still write code. It helps you relate to the developers, especially we've gone hybrid and remote, and you don't sit there and you don't get to hear the people around you and what they're suffering with. Write the code, see that design that you came up with. You're like, this is the way it's going to work. And then you try and implement it. And it doesn't, you get to share that pain of, oh, we need to change the design because I see that it doesn't work.
It's harder to hear foreheads hitting keyboards these days. Although I've gotten really good over the years when I've been responsible for teams is watching check-ins. Because there's, I learned the shape of each of my developers' check-ins. There's folks that check in almost every hour. They're always pushing code onto their branch. That's how they like to work. Ones that typically do it before the lunch break and before they leave at the end of the day. And as soon as you see a change in the pattern of check-in, it's a good chance to go and look for keyboard imprints on the forehead. Like that's usually there's another key rule, which is like, if you haven't had a check-in from that developer in 3 days, do you really think on the 4th day you're going to get the greatest check-in known to man? I'm thinking no.
I'm still waiting for it. I keep waiting for that to happen, and I've seen that behavior too many times.
But yeah, you know, I'm also big on trying not to interrupt them when they're working. But if there's 2 days have gone by and I haven't seen a check-in, and I'm used to them checking in twice a day, you kind of swing, you know, give them a ping or something and say, hey, how's it going? I want to die. I'm like, okay. Let's talk.
I think that this all gets back to that idea that my first skill that every architect needs to have is good communication. Because my statement is every software problem is fundamentally a communication problem.
Right.
Every one. I look at, you send, and that's true no matter who or what's communicating. Like, we can have problems between two servers, two systems that are trying to talk to each other.
Right.
You can have communication problems between the developer trying to write the code, and as what you're describing is the people interacting with each other about the software. Like, maybe you didn't understand requirements, or maybe you thought you understood the requirements and you go and implement it and it doesn't do what you want to. Did you write a bug? The bug is just you told the computer to do something and it's not what you wanted it to do. Like, whose fault is that?
It's like that.
And then you look at our errors. Look at a HTTP 400 response. Like, it's the first of the 400 client errors, and all it says is bad request, which is, I don't understand what you wanted me to do.
Right. That's
like, we understand communication problems are our problems.
Yeah. That's the web server's way of saying, now see, what we have here is a failure to communicate.
I mean, I'm also concerned that often people are looking at the architectural role as somewhat dictatorial. It's like, you will build it this way. I think, you know, when I'm working in that group, it's like, what does it take to persuade the architect that we maybe need to shift the design?
Because Richard and I know some very opinionated architects, do we not?
I think it was a Scott Hanselman quote that he likes strong opinions that are weakly held.
Right.
Like, go out there and say, here's what you're going to do. But once someone convinces you through data, through analysis, like, I know you said this was a good plan, but I thought about these other things. And you're like, yep, you've convinced me. We're going to change the plan. Be willing to, you know, don't die on every sword. Like, not all of them are good decisions. You're not right every time.
Well, and in the end, we're all working on the same problem. You're trying to deliver results for customers. So it's not you're wrong, I'm right either. It's we're helping to mature the plan.
It's a good idea to adopt the phrase, I think, and inject that into your sentences when you're talking to people.
And the presumption as an architect, and I mean, I've been through this where I'm in a house that we built, right? And I remember the builder, who was the general contractor who happened to be the carpenter, realizing that both the architect, the structural engineer, and the city had missed a design flaw in the blueprint. And that there was a missing beam, and nobody had caught it until the guy building it said, hey, what's holding this up?
Right.
Excuse me. I just got one question. Excuse me.
And that is often when the developers realize, I know you said that this server can talk to that server, but something's missing, or this code doesn't work. And it's that glaring hole that once you see it, how would you have missed that? But everyone can miss it.
No, it absolutely happens. And it needs to be a path of communication to feed that back. You also can't presume you're right either, right? It's like, hey, I cannot make I have not been successful making these two machines communicate. I don't know if it's me or it's them, but this is what's happened.
Yeah.
Yep. So going back to the idea that if every software problem is a communication problem,
right.
The other flip side of that is that as an architect, the biggest impact that you can have to make a project successful is to find ways to improve communication, right? We can improve how our services talk to each other. Are we using synchronous or asynchronous communication? We can improve.
But this is where UML comes in, because UML is a great way to communicate, right? Right?
UML is just a very structured version of the ad hoc boxes and arrows. That's my oversimplification.
Yeah. Cocktail napkin with circles and arrows on it. Yes.
Boxes and arrows are fine. I like Simon Brown's C4 model.
Right.
The C4 model, it's the 4 C's are, I'm going to test myself. Context, something code. Anyway, it's 4 different layers of the architecture. And the difference is each one of those layers, you draw different diagrams because they are intended for a different audience, which goes to my thing. I said this the last time I was on the show. The number one advice for how to improve communication is know your audience. Who are you talking to? What are you trying to explain to them? And what's the most effective way to communicate?
Context, containers, components, and code.
Thank you. I knew I should have had it at my fingertips. You can Google faster.
I can.
From the context is, I want to build a house. And then the code is, I want to, install this wall or this electricity, right? Those are the different things. And just like your general contractor analogy and your architect to I'm going to give something to my subs to do the work, you have to provide different diagrams. So UML might be useful in one of those situations, but it's not the right tool for everybody. And sometimes the diagram isn't the right way to present it to the field. Maybe you have to give a PowerPoint presentation and you want the really simplified view of the world with maybe some boxes and arrows, but it's just what that audience needs to hear. So
I took a systems analysis class in college, and I remember the professor saying on day 1, he says, the most important thing you can do as an analyst is get an org chart. Get an organization chart. You should know who you're talking to before you say one word. And that's, I've never seen anybody offer an org chart. And I don't know, Richard probably does that when he goes into, because he needs to know who's your boss? Who's your boss's boss? I want to talk to your boss's boss's boss.
How are decisions ultimately made?
Right. Yeah.
Because often, as the external guy, as the consultant, you are less susceptible to siloing yourself. You tend to go between these layers. And often you're turning up communication failures that are already happening. I mean, let's face it, you didn't call me because things were going well. Right. So, and I've said this before, like pretty quickly you figure out in this role, you're a marriage counselor.
Yeah.
Right. It's not it is not that the technology can't do it. It's that this team is struggling to do it. And why?
Person A complains about person B complains about person A, and they complain to you. And you're like, well, geez, okay.
Yeah. Well, and also just expectations aren't aligned all the way up. So it's always good to press against all that. But you don't do it in the disguise of this is a dysfunctional team.
Right.
You do this in disguise of, hey, I'm the new guy. I'm only here for a week and you're paying me a lot of money. So
let's fix some things.
Can I ask some questions? And just the process of them explaining it to you. I mean, so I swear it's very rubber duck. How, that first day where we're just going to use whiteboards and draw the problem out, the number of times we turn up the actual problem in the process.
Thomas just held up a rubber duck.
His rubber duck.
I have one right in hand.
Wow.
Right in hand.
The point of that org chart goes to an idea that Gregor Hope describes as riding the architect elevator. That you need to be able to go from the IT engine room down in the basement all the way up to the CEO penthouse and be able to communicate to all those different stakeholders at all those different levels to be effective. And again, before you open the doors to get off the floor, think about who's the audience that's receiving that. What do they need to hear? And sometimes what do they not need to hear?
Yeah.
Like you're not going to get an hour sit down with the CEO. Well, maybe Richard does, but I'm not going to. If I can get 5 minutes, I have to give a really, really concise 5-minute pitch. Yeah. Maybe it's 30 seconds. And so what is the important thing you need to communicate to help them make the decision that you're there to provide advice on?
Gentlemen, I can interrupt for one moment for this very important message. And we're back. It's .NET Rocks. I'm Richard Campbell. That's Carl Franklin.
Hey.
Talking to our friend Thomas Betts about this art of architecture as much as this, doing it better. And he hit on a really key point before the break there, which is part of an architect's skills, not just communication, but communication in multiple languages, effectively. The language of the developer, the language of the business stakeholder, the language of the system reliability engineer or site reliability engineer, the guys who are going to operate this stuff. Like if you're doing your job well, you are making sure all those stakeholders have a seat, are being heard, and that their concerns are manifest in your diagrams and documents.
Yep. I think that moves us into the second point level of my skills you need to know is decision making, because it's that first step is understanding the decision to be made. You have to gather information from all those stakeholders. What do you want in your house? And I've basically distilled decision making down to almost a simplified scientific method, that you have that first step of understanding the decision, and then take the time to produce some options, evaluate those options, and then decide on something. And then the last step, just like the scientific method, is to communicate your decision. Now, that first and last step say, hey, look how important communication is. If you don't take the time to talk to the right people and understand what they need, and again, those different viewpoints are going to have different impacts on how you design something, then you might design the wrong system. You might have missed that beam that you needed to put up.
And many times, the people that you're interviewing and asking their opinions, sometimes they'll say, I have no idea. What do you think? And sometimes they'll be very opinionated. Oh, we want to use the LAMP stack with, Kubernetes and all this stuff. And you have to ask them why, without coming across like you don't know anything, and then they're going to throw you under the bus in the next meeting because you're an idiot. There's a dance to be done there, right? You need to, okay, you want to do this. Tell me why. What are the benefits? What are the drawbacks?
Yep. I think it goes to ask any architect any question. Their default response is, it depends.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Because it always depends on what was your decision criteria. And that example of, I want to use the LAMP stack. Well, why?
Right.
Well, we use the LAMP stack. Well, why do we use the LAMP stack?
Right.
It's like, well, it's in our architectural diagrams. And can you tell me, well, why was the decision made? Well, it's on the diagram.
It's cheap.
The diagram it's like watching the Olympics. Imagine they only covered the medal ceremony and they only showed the gold medalists.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get to see anybody else. You don't get to see any of the events. Like, something's missing. The diagram just captures the winner. But there was a lot of thought process, that whole scientific method of, here are the options we chose. And that's why instead of just having the diagrams, as useful as they can be, I like to use architecture decision records, ADRs, because they capture that why behind the decision. Why did we use the LAMP stack? Here was what we considered. Here are the trade-offs that we looked at. And then this one because of all these decisions.
A good technique that I like to use is, okay, pretend I don't know anything about whatever it is you're suggesting, the LAMP stack, Kubernetes. Pretend I don't know anything. Convince me. Go ahead. And I'm going to just make some notes here. Because if you're an architect, right, you'll probably know these things. And somebody's going to just look at you and say, like you said, well, because that's the best thing, right? Because why should I explain it to you? So you have to say, look, pretend I'm your mother. Explain, explain yourself.
Grandma Franklin needs to know why the LAMP stack.
Absolutely.
I grabbed the link to ADR GitHub.io, which is a pretty good summary of the architectural decision records. This is really about documenting these decisions to capture why.
It's documenting your decisions. The term, I think, was coined, as far as I can tell, by Michael Nygaard, back in 2011.
It's a ThoughtWorks thing.
Yeah.
Most things come down to ThoughtWorks, don't they?
And the other one that you might want to look up is MADR, M-A-D-R, the Markdown. Well, it was Markdown Architecture Decision Records. They changed the name to Markdown Any Decision Records because what we're talking about, this decision making, it doesn't have to be just software architecture. Those were just the first people that needed to find a way to communicate their decisions.
Right.
I would love to see more businesses using this for the business decisions. Why did we decide to do this project and not that project? Why did we fund this? Why are we, hiring these people? Why are we doing whatever? You can capture those decisions as opposed to, it was decided from.
Yeah. And nobody's ever going to read these except the large language model that's operating your business, which should be enough, right? Like then you can ask it questions and it should have pretty good answers based on the ADR data.
Yeah. There's been discussion about that. Like, can we plug it in and say, can it analyze what the next decision, what is right and what is wrong? I have to admit, when ChatGPT first came out and I was working on this presentation, I'm like, I wonder what it would do. And so I asked it questions and I found it's good in that rubber duck scenario. Give me the options. What are the trade-offs? And if you are really, really lazy, you can ask it to write an ADR for you. Now, check it because what it decides might not be the right thing for you, but it might give you that starting point.
Right.
Yeah. In the end, all the text is right is no different than a deep fake made by an image generator. It's sometimes those images aren't half bad, and sometimes the text isn't half bad. But it is, and it's nice to work from something already written. It's easier to edit than to write from scratch, but you do have to edit it.
Yeah. And I like ADRs because they get you out of that blank whiteboard scenario.
Yeah.
Like, when you go in and ask somebody, draw your system and show me where your pain points are, that's good. But when you get down to how are we going to solve the problem, I have sat there and stared at the blank whiteboard with a pen in hand, like, I don't know, the answer's not coming to me. And you're just trying to think through and get to that, like, you want to get to the end of the race without running it.
Yeah.
The ADR, if you start with the markdown one, it's a template, and it's like, what's the name of the decision? What are you trying to decide? What are you considering? And just the act of having to fill out the template and write it out, it's the rubber duck again.
Yeah.
You are explaining to yourself because you're going to have to explain it assuming someone else will read this document.
Well, sometimes the decision is not a bad decision, but it's unnecessary because of somewhere lower down in the stack, a decision was made that is focusing you on the wrong problem. And so that's where an architect can come in and say, I understand why you're not coming up with a solution to this. It's because it's architected wrong. It's designed wrong. And, here's some suggestions of how to avoid this pitfall.
Yeah. That gets to the third point. It's a good segue to adaptability, because everything constantly changes, right? Like, no architecture plan survives first contact with the engineers. They are going to break it. They are not going to follow it, or they're going to implement it exactly the way you told them to, even the wrong things that you didn't realize.
Right.
And you have to change that. We have to have agile architecture. We have to have an architecture that can continually evolve. And if you make your decisions assuming this is the one and only way to do this, and they will never change, the only way you're going to fix that is to replace the system down the line. It's better to say, here are the decisions we're making, and we assume that they're going to change over time.
Mm-hmm.
And if we document them, when we say, this isn't working anymore, we need to change it, instead of, well, here's the diagram, and try and redraw the diagram. If you look at the ADR, it's got a date on it, and it's got a decider, like you have someone's name, like who to blame, and go ask the question. Like, you chose this based on these criteria, but now we have 1 million users hitting our website. Maybe our decision criteria was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It was right at the time, but it no longer fits. You can just revisit that decision, and you have that as a starting point, as opposed to throw it all over and start again.
You get those names and dates. It's kind of like a walk-in in a restaurant, right? You have to date things, and you have to name them. What is this? Is it meat? Is it cake?
We'll call it meat cake.
I know. Yeah.
But you also make a point here, or you're implying a point here, which is that the architects have to stay engaged.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I have run into organizations where they're working from an architectural template, and that person isn't at the company anymore.
Mm.
Right.
And so it's like this idea of architecture as gospel is disturbing.
Yeah. And maybe if you have at least their name and not just a department, or the architecture team made this. What does that mean? Like, I want to know, Thomas made this decision. Can I go ask him? And if you ask me about something I decided 6 months ago, I'm going to scratch my head and wonder. I'm like, yeah, it seemed like a good idea at the time, but I don't remember the details. If I wrote it down, I can point to it, and we can have a discussion over that and say, is that still valid? And, we assume that. Is this still correct? Or what has changed?
How many problems arise or can arise from people being afraid of looking bad? I'm sure you've seen that as much as I have.
There is sometimes I want to push forward because this is what we're doing, and I don't want to be the person to hit the brakes. My hardest decision, I'm not going to go into the details, but people know about this. A year ago was, I think we're going the wrong direction. And it was my decision to go down that path.
Right.
And then 4, 5, 6 months later, it's like, this is really not the right way to go. And having gone through the whole process and documented the whole way, it's like, hey, this was a great idea, but our business requirements changed, and we want to do a slightly different path, or a significantly different path. We shouldn't just keep going blindly down that direction.
Yeah.
And so, we're going to lose a few months worth of effort, but in the long run, and that was part of the ADR, was let me show you what this looks like on a timeline. Because again, explain to the right people. The business owner needs to know not just, the technical solution isn't going to work or it's going to be hard. What does that mean? Like, it means that a year and a half from now, we're not going to hit our goal.
Yeah.
And that's the money you're going to save. And a year and a half from now, we're going to deliver something instead. Oh, I like that.
Yeah. I can quickly deliver you the wrong thing.
Oh, yeah.
Or we can spend a little more time to deliver the right thing. Which would you prefer?
Actually, we were going to spend a long time delivering the wrong thing, too. So
yeah, we can spend a long time delivering the wrong thing if you want.
The worst of all worlds.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the real question is, how much of a refactor of architecture takes place. Like there's lots of incremental twitches you can do, but that whole, hey, we kind of have to relay this whole thing out again.
Yeah. Yeah. I like when you can go into a new project and you say, we're going to have an evolutionary architecture or a continuous architecture. There's two different terms. There's different people. And the guys that I worked with for an article series on InfoQ, Pierre Pure and Kurt Bittner, they talked about a minimum viable architecture. And I love this idea of the MVA,
I like it.
Which is the architecture that supports your MVP, your minimum viable product. Like, again, business stakeholders understand the MVP.
Right.
Well, I'm going to give you just enough architecture to support that because we're going to put this out in the wild, let customers use it, and then wait for feedback to find out what's our next step. What are we going to build on top of it? And as we change which direction the product heads, we have to make changes to our architecture as well. And the fact that you've designed your architecture to be adaptable and change because it's based on those decisions that can change, it kind of builds in that agility from the get-go.
Yeah, it sounds, if you're comfortable with the idea that you're going to revise the architecture, it is going to be revisited, then you do a lot. You don't have to overplan. You can just bring in that minimal viable with this acceptance of it being refactored and affecting the software below it.
I think that being agile, it applies to both the architecture we build and how we as architects practice our jobs. I mentioned earlier, you're not sitting in a desk in a cubicle farm next to everyone. Everyone's remote. How do you get the pulse of everything? Well, that switch, that abrupt shift from in-person to everyone's hybrid brought about a bunch of communication challenges, but people also saw communication opportunities. Like we went to more people are doing asynchronous communication. Like I don't need to have that face-to-face meeting.
Right.
And those are those distractions you talked about. I don't want to bother the developer and interrupt their day because this 5-minute call is going to actually take them out of their headspace for an hour. So asynchronous communication is good. ADRs support asynchronous communication instead of only the people who can go into the room with the whiteboard and draw on the conference room whiteboard get to be in the decision. No, everybody can see your decision. I like sticking them in source control. Put them in Git. It's a text file.
Yeah.
Anybody can see them. They're highly adaptable. And I think we've even seen, kind of the fallout of the companies that adapted well to being remote, like the ones who were able to just like keep doing business and didn't have this abrupt like stop in their business process. Like, some of that is the team and some of it is the architecture. And you guys have talked about Conway's Law a few times, that your architecture looks like your team's.
Your team architecture, yeah.
Yeah. And I have the COVID corollary to Conway's Law that highly effective distributed teams are able to build highly effective distributed systems. And contrary to that, if your teams struggle with that highly distributed communication, you are not going to be successful building a distributed system. If you're like, we're going to do microservices, but our teams have to be in the office together. Like, your team structure is a monolith. You have to build a monolith. Yeah,
you're more relevantly, you're going to build a monolith.
Oh, yeah.
You can call it whatever you want, but this is what's going to come out of the other side. And it's interesting to point, your point then is like, because the team is distributed, we've kind of have an opportunity here to make it easier to build more distributed systems because they're already working like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we find, where are the teams struggling to communicate? How do we fix that? That's that marriage counselor role. How do we fix the communication between teams? If they have to talk to each other every day, then there's not really two teams. You have one big team.
The first thing is to not use Teams.
We have a combination of Slack and Teams. Yeah. And you can tell, guess who uses Slack?
I'm a big Slack fan. Not a big
The engineers use Slack. Everyone else in the business uses Teams.
Yeah.
So,
but yeah, interesting. You were talking about this idea of if you're communicating with a group every day, they're actually on the same team.
Right. And that's that you want loose coupling in your architecture. You want loose coupling in your teams. And so if those teams want to be able to work independently, you want to reduce how many communication points they have.
Right.
That will be in their software as well, that their software will communicate on the same boundaries. But if you have that, we've got to talk every day, then yeah, you've got two services that are highly coupled, and they're going to have to be deployed in lockstep.
Might as well be the same service.
Yeah. Now you have the distributed monolith, which is the worst of all worlds.
At the same time, I'm always loath to block communication in any way.
Right.
But I would think in an architect's role, you're like, okay, these teams need to communicate routinely.
You want useful communication.
Right.
Like, you shouldn't have to talk all the time to figure out, hey, how do I call your service? Like, that should be documented. Make a Swagger endpoint and just generate a client off of that. And if it doesn't work and it doesn't do what you need, and say, hey, I need a new endpoint, how do you submit a pull request to them? How do you use those techniques and have a little bit of discussion over, here's what I need from you, not let's sit down together and now I've pulled you off your task so you can work on my task with me.
This is a good opportunity to ask you, Thomas, what you thought of the modular monoliths show we did with Layla, because we're talking about that now.
I'm actually halfway through that episode.
Oh, okay.
But no, the modular monolith is a topic that's on the InfoQ trends report. So every year, InfoQ does several different trends reports, and I'm responsible for the architecture one. And we've had some variation of modular monolith moving across that, the graph for a while. And it's the idea that you don't it's not monolith versus microservices.
Yeah,
it's well architected systems. And what are the modules that you need to build, and recognizing.
Yeah, you can separate concerns without going full on microservice.
Right. And so if your code, sometimes it's as simple as, how do you organize your code? I can't remember who talked about was it good architecture? There was some discussion about how to set up your project, and it was like very structured and you had to follow the rules. It's like, this is so much structure. I'm like, I think what he was getting at is, if I have a directory structure and I'm going to change, we do financial stuff, invoices, and here's the invoices controller, and then here's the invoices business layer, and here's the invoices data layer, and any one change to invoices is touching code in 3 different places. Like, if you just modify the folder structure and say it's invoices, and then underneath that is all the stuff, when you make a change to that module, like, all of your changes are under one directory structure, and mentally you're like, oh, this is not a big cross-cutting concern. It's that vertical slice. And all those vertical slices stay together. And so when I see modular monoliths, I think that's good, because you're focusing on the modularity aspect. The monolith is just the delivery technique.
Yeah, a good way to find out what's going to get touched is just change the interface. Just let the compiler tell you.
Yeah. I think it was Yuval Noah who talked about the things you break off into monoliths or into microservices. It's not necessarily for the performance gains, but what is likely to change a lot.
Yeah.
And you want the thing that you change a lot to be as small as possible. And the stuff you don't change a lot is very stable. Like, the food in my fridge gets changed all the time, but my refrigerator doesn't get changed.
Let's be honest. You don't do this for performance. In fact, it will often degrade performance. You do this for, you want to be agile.
It depends what you mean by performance.
Yeah.
I had to throw out, it depends there. Because if you have a service that needs to do 1 million requests, then you need to be able to scale that to handle 1 million requests. And the other service doesn't need to have that much load. Does it need to be as big?
Yeah, and that's not so much a performance conversation as a scaling conversation.
Yeah, and you need to find the appropriate level of granularity for all of these things.
Yeah, but I do agree with that. Yuval's position on where are your points of resonance? Like where and how big you want the smallest pieces of your code vibrating. So it's like, there's constant change happening in this service, but it's tied to these other 4. And so now they're all constantly being redeployed. It's like peeling that one off and paying a bit of overhead to it so that the impact of update is lower.
Yeah.
Yep.
You're willing to pay that overhead. Only, often those overheads are milliseconds. So it's not that big of a deal, but it is a security boundary. It's a transactional boundary. Like nothing is free.
Yeah. If you got something that has to be really secure, you've got PII data, whatever, and you need PCI data, whatever it is. Like, I want nobody to see that except this little thing over here. That's easy.
Yep.
It's the convenience factor where, I'll just put this code here that tends to get to, like, the monolith isn't bad. It's the big ball of mud that's bad.
Yeah,
the code that we can't understand that's bad. So the monolith is fine if it's the right thing. And for most cases, don't start with microservices.
Yeah.
Like that's usually your first step. Like if I had one problem and then we came with microservices, now I have 99 problems.
Now I have a microservices, a problem factory, right?
Yeah.
I think in that same show with Layla, and admittedly, it came out yesterday, so I don't blame you for not having finished listening to it yet. We're recording it the day after it was published. There's another Conway's Law element there where, I think Layla did a good job of describing where's the case where you start with microserves. It's a very large project. It's a large project, and you have a large distributed team working on it, where now the microservices boundaries actually simplify working in parallel with such a big team.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But if you don't have all of those things, like you're just creating ceremony you don't need.
Yeah. I think it's Martin Fowler has a post of you must be this tall to ride microservices.
Yeah, I love it.
And
I love it.
And if you only have 10 people, you should not do it.
Yeah.
Right? You need someone to work on your platform. How do you make it easy to spin up new services and tear them down? Like I don't want to have to be going into the Azure portal every time I need a new service. I have almost command line tools. I want to create something. I spin something up, and that platform that we need for the development to be efficient. You need people that are just dedicated on that problem and be able to make that scale and efficient to your team.
Yeah,
very fair.
Well done.
Coming into the end here, how do we want to wrap this up?
Leadership?
Anything to call back on?
Yeah, the last thing we didn't get to was leadership. And I think that this goes back to the point that every architect still needs to write some code. And on the flip side, all developers can do architecture. I talked to Andrew Harmalaw, who I just saw today. The first 2 chapters of his new book are coming out. They're available on O'Reilly or somewhere. But he talked about the architecture advice process. And it gets to the idea that anyone can make architecture decisions. There's only 2 caveats. You have to talk to all the people who are going to be impacted by the decision and talk to the people who have knowledge about and the relevant experience to make the decision. Yeah. So this is one of those things like be the servant leader and help mentor the next generation of architects. Again, you don't have to be an architect, but I want to help you make good decisions. Maybe it's not even an architecture decision. Maybe it's, should I use this library or that library? Let's think about it. Mm-hmm. Maybe we should write an ADR for that to just go through the process. And if they see, I've had engineers I work with say, I appreciate that we use ADRs because it tells me how to make a decision. Like they are seeing why was the decision made, but also, I can use that as a template when I need to make a hard decision. So
if I can complete this ADR document in a sensible way, I have a better chance of getting that decision done.
Yep. Yeah. So architecture is a team sport. We got to find the ways to work with everybody, encourage them to get better. I think the last little shout out I have to give is read Domain Driven Design by Eric Evans. Because when we talk about communication, and I said that communication is between computers, between people and computers, and between 2 people, DDD really gets to the heart of that. I mean, the subtitle of the book is Tackling Complexity at the Heart of Software. If you use a ubiquitous language within a bounded context and you take that language of the business, use it for your requirements, use it for your code, it's going to solve a lot of problems because you don't have those extra translation steps. You just simplify the communication. And so that's one of the things that I always go back to. It's like, how do we define our domain and recognize that what the language is within my domain isn't the same outside the domain. Like if I say cookies, am I going to go and give you a cookie to eat, or are you accepting the cookies on the website?
Right.
Words don't always mean the same. And so make that bounded context, make the boundary and say, right now for our problem, here's what we're talking about.
Yeah. Good stuff. Thomas, what's next for you? What's in your inbox?
So my bio mentioned that I'm living with my wife and son here in Denver. My son starts college in 2 weeks.
Congratulations. Another great milestone.
So not at all nervous or excited about that.
Okay.
It's crazy.
Is he staying in state?
No. 1 state over. He's going to Nebraska. So,
okay.
Wow.
Yeah. So close enough he could come over for the weekend, but far enough away that he probably won't.
So Denver has like the 3rd busiest airport in the world. Omaha does not. And I have to say, having flown in there, it's amazing.
It's so great, isn't it?
It's I love getting in and out of small airports. And then the other thing on my to-do list coming up, I'll be speaking at my company's annual conference, BBCon, in October, which is back in person for the first time since the pandemic.
Yeah.
And it's in Denver. It moves around the country.
Nice.
And so I'm like, I'm in Denver. So
you get to go home at night.
So anyone listening to the show who is a Black Bug customer and wants to hear about the architecture we're doing within our systems, that's what I'll be speaking about. A couple of my coworkers.
Fantastic.
So.
Awesome.
All right, Thomas, this has been great. It's always good to talk to you, and it's been a long time. And come back soon, will you?
Of course. Happy to help anytime.
All right, we'll see you next time on .NET Rocks. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Plop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.
Got transmitter banned by the FCC. Yes, I'm a